Hello, welcome everyone. Good morning. We are so excited to have you joining us today. And as folks are coming onto the call, we'll get started just a moment. Welcome. Glad you guys are joining us today for Neuro Leadership and Corona. Who in the world ever thought that that would be a title of our talk today? I could have never predicted it in a gazillion years. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're going to give folks a little bit of time just to get situated and come on the call. We'll start in 1 minute. All right, Alicia, I'm ready to go. Would you share your screen with folks?
Absolutely. Just one moment.
So welcome, everyone. My name is Anissa Avon, and this is Leading in a Crisis, HR and business strategies for navigating chaos and change. And today's conversation is with Alicia Maples, I think I said that right, Maples, and it is on Neuro Leadership and Corona, utilizing neuroscience to keep employees motivated and engaged during change. We are grateful. We know you have a lot of places and a lot of things to do during this time of chaos, and you've decided to join us, so I am so appreciative. I want to start by saying thank you to our sponsors, the David Whitmarsh and his organization, the Whitmarsh Consulting Group. They are a group of distinctively professional individuals focusing on multi-channel marketing and human resource information technology consulting. Our next sponsor is Insperity. And Insperity, of course, is an HR outsourcing organization. They have been kind enough and gracious enough to provide our participants with an incredibly valuable free gift. It is a free HR financial analysis report and debrief. You can see the link on your screen to get your free report. It's turnkeycoachingsolutions.net, hrreport.com, and the capitalization of HR and R matters. Just a real quick note on this financial analysis. That's taking our business performance advisors that we've partnered with over Insperity about 3 to 10 hours, depending on your organization. And they know that some clients that might take advantage of this are not going to be a good fit. So there's really no obligation for you guys. It's a high value freebie. So I want to introduce myself. I am the CEO of Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions. And about 2 weeks ago, when the US really began to experience COVID-19, my team and I had a huddle. And we knew that this was about to change our business, but also we knew we needed to live our mission. And our mission is to have a meaning, to do something that matters, to support leaders in becoming all that they're capable of being, and to support organizational development experts in making a difference and having an impact. I believe that conscious leaders are the kind of leaders that can really help our planet and help our world and help just our economy and everything. So part of our mission is to give back. And that was what happened with the birth of Leading in a Crisis Virtual Summit. What I want you guys to know is that on the summit page live, Alicia, would you change that slide? There we go. Leading in a Crisis, Actionable Business and HR Strategies for Navigating Crisis and Change. On that live page, we are adding new talks every day. My heart has been touched by the willingness of experts like Alicia Maples in just saying, absolutely, I'm in. Where do I go? Tell me what you need. I'll do it. So we have 40 plus speakers lined up. It is going to occur every Wednesday and Thursday throughout the month of April. And I hope you'll join us for as many or just the ones that are a good fit for you. Now, just before we start, I want to introduce you guys to just a couple of special offers that we've got going on. This is not a pitch fest. I'm not going to go into detail, but I did want to let you know that we have 2 offers that we've designed specifically for the crisis at hand. Would you change to that next slide for me? One is a BOGO offer for virtual training specifically on the topics related to the chaos and crisis we're looking at. Things like managing a newly remote workforce to maximizing performance and business continuity to Neuroleadership, for example. The other thing that we have put together with some expert outplacement coaches is an extremely affordable, as in way affordable. Would you change to the next slide, Alicia? It's you. So, and I'll share a little bit more about the outplacement offer a little bit later. So now I'm excited to introduce you guys to our guest expert. Alicia Maples is an executive leadership coach. She's a corporate trainer facilitator. She has certifications like you wouldn't believe, DISC and Myers-Briggs and 7 Habits and Lominger Voice 360. And goodness, I could really go on and on about that. But what's really interesting is she started out her, your second career, right, was 12-year career as a CEO of a really successful consulting company.
That's right.
So your background is incredibly diverse. And I'm not surprised that you are one of the thought leaders on Neuroleadership and bringing this to your clients and organizational development. So tell us what you're going to share with us today. What are we going to learn, and what makes you the expert, Alicia?
Well, thank you. It's really nice to be here. And hello, everybody. I am so glad that you're here today to learn about Neuroleadership and how you can utilize this interesting science to help keep your employees motivated, engaged, and productive in a situation where we've got so much change that is happening. So thank you, Anissa, for that introduction. As Anissa said, I'm the founder of Brilliant SMB. I have had 2 careers. One is as a corporate human resources leader, and I did that for about 15 years, and then Brilliant SMB has been mine for 12 years in consulting. And so that's a little bit about me. I am very interested, and I know Anissa as well, in learning a little bit about who you are, because the more we know about you, the more I understand and Anissa understands how to have this conversation. So hang on. Oh, wait a second. I don't think any of you are Inigo Montoya. Hang on. That's the wrong slide. Just a minute. Here we go. Okay.
No, but I do that with an accent. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
You killed my father. Yeah. But I know that all of you are awesome. And so if you would please take a moment and put in the chat what your role is. You don't have to put your name, but your role. Are you on the executive team? Are you in human resources? Are you in charge of communication, whether that's internal communication, external communication? We're just going to take a quick minute for you to tell us a little bit about your role in your organization. So we'll give
and
you
as you're doing that, the other thing I'd like to hear is, how can we make today's conversation meaningful for you? What's going on with you or your organization or your employees, and what's your burning desire that perhaps we can support you with in our limited time together?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. All right. So let's get into what we're going to do. So our agenda for today. By the end of today, you all are going to be brilliant. You're going to have new tools that are going to help you better understand what is happening with your employees on a biochemical level, again, for the purpose of helping them stay motivated, focused, and productive. So we're going to start off with a little bit of Neuroscience 101, just to give you a foundation of what this is all about. We're also going to talk about the 5 needs of every employee. This is science that is based on Dr. David Rock, who is the founder of Neuroleadership and the head of the Neuroleadership Institute. This is what he has established. So we're going to go through those. We're also going to talk about emotional triggers. Have you ever been mystified by an employee's emotional outburst? or an emotional breakdown, or when you were simply trying to give them some constructive feedback and all heck broke loose, we're going to learn more about just a few times. Yeah, we're going to learn more about why that happens, especially in our current world and country situations. Then we're going to talk about how we diffuse those emotional triggers. What do we need to do from a communication standpoint to diffuse the triggers? And then we have a bonus, which is there is one phrase that you have said, you may say it as a leader on a regular basis, that actually makes your employees' brains feel like they're about to die. One phrase. So we're going to talk about that so that we find ways to say it a little bit differently so your employees' brains don't think that they're going to die. Okay, so that's a lot to
make
cover.
us wait for that, aren't you? I'm already anxious.
I am. Yes, I am. All right, so that's a lot to cover in, oh my goodness, 40 minutes. All right, so here we go.
We got this.
Get ready. Let's start. Yeah, so, you know, like Joey Tribbiani, by the end of this, you're going to find out you're pretty wisdomous, you know? All righty. Okay, let's first talk about the brain science of change. So the bottom line is we don't like change. And this particular study actually says that in times of change, productivity drops by anywhere from 30 to 43% in times of change. That would be like your employees going to work, what, only 2.5 days out of a 5-day work week? And I want to put this in context. This particular study was done on a one-dimensional change basis. So for an example, perhaps a new point of service or point of sale system was introduced. Maybe there was a change in leadership. Maybe there was a change in process or in systems. And productivity drops by 30 to 43%. Now, let's look at, there are no studies for what's happening today from a productivity standpoint. But let's look at the massive amount of change that's happening in our world and in our country, and the fact that most of us have been forced into this change. This is not change that any of us have wanted. I know a lot of parents who are not necessarily happy that schools are closed and they've got kiddos at home. Businesses are closing. We're working from home. And oh yeah, there's this nasty virus that we don't know a whole lot of information about. So where productivity statistics are dropping, there isn't a study, but if it drops from 30 to 43% on a one-dimensional basis, what happens when change is happening all around us that we have no control over? Our brains are hardwired to resist change. Our brains are hardwired to resist change. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, he's a neuroscientist, and he wrote a book called The Mind and the Brain. He's done some fascinating research, and he describes it this way. Our subconscious mind, it works like a well-oiled machine. It doesn't require a lot of energy or conscious thought as long as we are in some kind of habitual activity. The moment there is change of any kind, our brains immediately trigger out. It's that Danger Will Robinson kind of thing. Our brains are hardwired to change.
You know, Alicia, what's interesting about that and also frightening is the fact that, you know, the most recent Gallup survey said engagement was better, but it's still only 34% of employees are actively engaged, which means 64% are somewhat disengaged, actively disengaged, et cetera. So now if you tack on top of that, this 30%, we're in trouble. And that's just that one dimensional. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome, and that's part of why we're doing this. That's part of why Turnkey is putting on this virtual summit, and that's part of why I'm doing this presentation. I normally give this when there is some kind of an organization is facing some type of one-dimensional change, and here we are in it's multifaceted. So I put this slide up really to make you all laugh. You know, if my brain could make a face when confronted with change, this is the face that it would make, because all of us, and not us as persons, this is something that happens biochemically. We have no control over it. We are hardwired to resist change, and it's tied to many things, and we're going to talk about that next. Your responsibility, regardless of whether change is happening or not, is keeping employees productive. And so our responsibility today is to teach you how to do that using Neuroleadership as a basis. So we're going to do some Neuroscience 101. This is just to give you some really foundational principles. And I think everybody knows one little bit of neuroscience. You know, neuroscience is the science or the study of the brain. The thing that's most familiar to people, I think, would be fight or flight. That's something I'm sure that you've heard of before, Anissa, fight or flight.
Just a few times.
Yep. So that is a brain response. We're going to talk about some additional brain responses. So the thing that I want you to know is that your brain is constantly working. It's always doing something. We're just not consciously aware of it. And it has two functions. The first function is to keep us alive. That's function number one. The second function is to keep us safe. And as I mentioned, our brain is constantly working to do these things, to keep us alive and to keep us safe. What we're going to talk about today is the keep us safe part. So we are always evaluating everything that's around us, and we're placing it in two buckets, so to speak. Is this thing that I'm hearing or that I'm seeing or that I'm engaging with, is this something that I want to avoid, or is this something that I want to approach? How does our subconscious mind make that decision? Well, it evaluates, is this thing that's in front of me, is this thing that I'm hearing or seeing, these things that are occurring, is it a threat? Because if it's a threat, I'm going to avoid it. Or is there a potential for reward? And if there's the potential for reward, then I'm going to approach it. So it's the threat versus the reward response. And what we have discovered, we being neuroscientists, through this Neuroleadership scientific approach and data analysis, we've discovered something, that social and emotional interactions in our brain in the workplace cause the same kind of responses as though we are experiencing significant pleasure or significant pain. So let me just say that again. If I am experiencing physical pleasure or physical pain, there is a set of neural pathways in my brain that light up. If I experience social or emotional pleasure or pain in the workplace, those same neural pathways light up. So it is like I am experiencing physical pain or pleasure. And so we make these evaluations 5 times a second. So I don't know how many hundreds or even thousands of evaluations you've made since we started this program, but there are 5 every second, and this is all happening on a subconscious basis. If we had to do this consciously, we would be continuously exhausted, but our brains are designed to do this for us to keep us safe. So I have a question, and so time for some audience participation. Oops, let me go through a couple of other things first. So what happens when you feel threatened? So if I back up to this slide, the threat and the avoid. What happens if something triggers your threat response in your brain? Here are the things that occur in the workplace, all right? So the first is your threat response is triggered. We're going to talk about what those triggers are. The second thing, and this is really important, remember we talked about employees going into emotional overdrive. Depending on how strongly the threat response is triggered by our circumstances in the workplace, the logic center of our brain shuts down. That's the prefrontal cortex. So hear me on this. Biochemically, you become incapable of thinking logically. The prefrontal cortex shuts down. The next thing that happens when you are threatened and that threat trigger happens, the limbic system of your brain is fully engaged. You are in hyperdrive, and it's negative emotions that go into hyperdrive. So again, threat trigger happens, the prefrontal cortex of your brain, which is the logic center, shuts down. You become either completely incapable or have limited capacity to think logically, and you are full blown into your emotions. Does this sound like something that we want to do to our employees? No, we want to limit that as much as we can. The next thing that happens is an employee's ability to read subtleties and body language, read between the lines and what you're saying, that completely tanks. That's out the window. The brain is sending signals to your employee's mind, hey, play it safe, keep it safe, and the employee begins to react defensively. Does this sound like any situations that you may have encountered in the past?
Just a few, huh?
Just a few. And that is for pretty minor threat triggers. What we're going through right now has our brains in emotional overdrive at a subconscious level almost continuously. So, any questions or thoughts on that, Anissa, before we move on? Because I've got some questions for the audience.
Yeah, I think ask the questions of the audience.
Okay.
What you're beginning to share with us is pieces about the science that I don't know all of us connect neuroleadership to something more than, okay, are we just hijacking neuroscience to bring it into OD, but you're actually sharing the pieces that matter. So thank you for that. And yes, let's get the audience involved with what will work for them.
Okay, so here's a question, just to put things in context, in terms of the threat trigger and what happens to our bodies and what happens to our brains. So here's the question. What is a very common, everyday threat trigger for most people? A very common, everyday threat trigger for most people. Let me know if we've got any answers.
Speak for while we've got folks writing in. In fact, I won't even share mine because we have so many. So
okay.
It says job security in a time of uncertainty. Paige says phone calls. Wonder if she's a Gen Zer. Hint, hint. Wink, wink. Sheila's last minute changes. Pamela wrote job security, especially when news of unemployment is rising, behind on work, employment going down, unexpected conflict. And one of the things that you've written, Alicia, is a common everyday threat trigger. I know some folks that any change for a day can create a feeling of threat for them.
That's absolutely true. You're right. And all of the answers that everybody who's participating gave are spot on. I'm going to take it out of the workplace just for a moment because this is something that I think that most people can relate to. Are you ready? Here we go.
That's how did they get that picture of me?
This is now, a lot of people are not doing driving depending where you are in the country, but think back, if you're in a little bit of lockdown, think back when somebody cuts you off in traffic. This is the brain response that usually happens. You know, idiot, it's called a blinker. Why didn't you use it? All kinds. Put yourself in that situation of being cut off in traffic. All of the things that happen to you, both mentally and physically, that is the threat trigger. That's what the threat trigger looks like, all right? Now, you take that and you overlay that on top of all of the answers that all of our participants just gave. change, job security. Is there going to be enough toilet paper? Where am I going to find food? Am I going to get this? What's going to happen to my job? What's job security? The same thing. What Neuro Leadership tells us is the same things are happening in our brains as when we get cut off in traffic. And as leaders, we have a responsibility to, number one, try not to minimize triggering the threat response as much as we can, and also diffusing it. So I wanted to bring this down to something that I think everybody can relate to. Yeah, I love that picture. All right. Thank you for your responses, everybody.
And Alicia, I did want to let you know, we do have a question, but you can answer it now
Sure.
or whatever works. But Karen has written, the disc shows that some people like change, low S.
Yes.
If the brain does not like change, does the low S affect the brain differently?
That is a fabulous question, and DISC is one of my favorite things. Is one of my favorite things. It's very insightful. So everybody's change tolerance is different, and so both through Myers-Briggs and through DISC, we know that there are folks who behaviorally and communication, with respect to communication, have higher tolerance for change than for others. But that hardwiring is still there. And so one of your responsibilities as leaders is to understand about your employees, especially the ones that report directly to you, how strongly is the threat response triggered with change. There's always going to be, at least according to what neuroscience says, because this is what our brain does, it protects us. See, our brain says when there's change, that's unsafe. Anything that's habitual, anything that is routine, that's safe. We don't really have to do anything with it. When change is introduced, depending on the amount of change, depending on the severity of the change, also, interestingly enough, depending on who is initiating the change, is the change coming from somebody that we trust or somebody that we have lost respect for? All of these factors combined, and more that we're going to go through here in a minute, will impact our tolerance to that change. So excellent point, and thank you for bringing that up. We all have different tolerance levels for it. And we certainly don't want our employees to look like Michael Douglas in this movie Falling Down that came out in the 90s. All righty, so now let's get into Neuroleadership. This guy right here, who we're blinking at, his name is David Rock. He is the pioneer of the science of neuroleadership. He is from Australia. He is actually a neuroscientist, and he decided that he wanted to study the impact that leadership scenarios have on the brain. So he was the first person to ever obtain funding for and get published on the results of his neuro leadership testing. So what he did, and this is one of the things that makes neuro leadership very exciting to me, is in the past when we looked at, okay, how do we treat employees? How do we talk to employees? How do we structure comp? How do we structure benefits? We were going off of two things. We were going off of intuition, kind of common sense, and we were going off of psychology. Well, for a lot of executives who tend to be very left brain, data-oriented type of people, those two scenarios, intuition and psychology, didn't make a lot of sense. It's all about the bottom line, right? Well, what is so beautiful about neuroleadership is that now we actually have science that backs up why we should do and say things in a particular way. Why should we do the things that we do? Why should we say the things that we say? And how do we present things to people? Because here's what David Rock did. He gathered a large number of volunteers, put them into functional MRIs, and then put them through various leadership scenarios. He did this over a significant period of time. And he mapped what happened in the brain in various leadership scenarios. I had the great fortune of interviewing Dr. Rock for the San Antonio Express News. And when we talked, one of the things that he said to me is that first, some of the results were not surprising. Like, for an example, a leader who yells at their employees is going to cause them to feel threatened. That's kind of a duh moment, right? But there were also several other things that ended up being extremely surprising, and that's for him as a neuroscientist. And one of the things that he said is the strongest threat response that our brain can have is when somebody threatens our life. So God forbid, somebody says to us, puts a gun to our head and says, Alicia, you are going to die. I am going to kill you. That causes the most significant threat response in my brain. I have no control over it. It's something that happens automatically. It's subconscious. Well, one of the great surprises is there is something that we as leaders say and do all the time that causes the identical brain response. There is something that we say or do all the time that causes the brain to think in our employees, they're going to die. Are you ready for what that is? I'm going to give you the bonus now.
You know what I am. I've been waiting for this.
It is saying to an employee, can I give you some feedback?
Oh, goodness. I thought you were like about to give me feedback. So yes, my heart just went, oh, am I too loud? Am I obnoxious? Are my jokes not funny? Yes. So proof. We did not plan that, people.
Yeah. So that comment, can I give you some feedback? Or saying, let me tell you what other people think about your performance. Those two things cause the same reaction in your brain as though I am putting a gun to your head and telling you that you are about to die.
Wow.
That was a shock to Dr. David Rock. And that puts a whole new context on performance reviews and how we give feedback. And so that's why this ends up being Neuroleadership and communication ends up being something that we talk with companies about in terms of their 360s, in terms of their performance review process, in terms of performance management. So very interesting. So there's the little bonus for you.
That is the bonus. Okay. And you know you're not going to get off the call today without giving us what we can say, because there's not a single leader or HR professional on the planet that doesn't need, okay, well then how do I prepare someone for feedback?
Very good.
Management.
Yep. Keep me to it because I've got some answers for you for that and at the end. All right. Okay. The other thing that came out of all of this research that Dr. David Rock did, and I love it, it's the marrying of neuroscience with leadership, hence neuroleadership, is he discovered that there are 5 needs that every employee has, and that's what we're going to look at next. He calls it the SCARF model. Now, you can see here to the right, we've got a picture of a scarf and a model wearing a scarf. I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm just trying to make that easy and funny for you. All right, here's the SCARF model. He calls it SCARF because it's an acronym. These are the 5 needs, emotional and social needs, that every employee has in order to stay not just happy, not just kumbaya, feel good, but to stay engaged, to stay focused, to stay productive, to give that discretional effort to making your company be successful. It's these 5 things: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And again, we now have the brain science to back that up. What I want to tell you is that in light of our limited time today, and especially in light of what we're facing with COVID-19, I'm going to explain what these 5 are, but we're really going to camp on certainty and relatedness. These are the 2 most important areas for you as leaders to focus on to help your employees get through and maintain and be productive during the COVID-19 crisis. certainty, and relatedness.
I'm really glad those are the two that you selected, because if you hadn't, I would throw you a curveball. I think it's going to be very difficult for most employers to communicate certainty when there's so much uncertainty. So thank you for choosing those.
Yeah, you're welcome, and you're right, Anissa. That is not an understatement. These are the two places where leaders need to focus as much time as they can and most attention as they can. And I'm going to have some tips in both of these areas for those. So here we go. Let's talk about diffusing the threat response. I think that we can all agree that for the most part, our employees are in full-blown threat mode right now. Not necessarily because of anything that we're doing as leaders, although that may be true, but mostly because we are forced into unwanted change because of what's happening in our country. So our job right now is to diffuse that threat response. We want to start activating the reward center of the brain in our employees. We want them to start feeling pleasure instead of pain. And so how do we do that? So let's look at these. So first, let's do a little bit of explanation. So status. Status is really easy. Again, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but status is your relative importance. It's how important you believe as an employee you are to other employees. How valuable are you as compared to other employees? Are you a superhero in the organization? Leaders, are you calling out folks when they are doing things that are positive? A couple of interesting points about this. Status, again, all 5 of these are important. We're going to focus on 2, but I just want to let you know that according to the research around neuroleadership, interesting about status, when someone's internal status goes up, it triggers the reward response. And in fact, your brain's response in status is identical to the dopamine response of winning the lottery. So think about that for a minute. The more important somebody feels as related to others in the organization, they in their brain have a dopamine response like they just won the lottery. It's pretty powerful. And when somebody's status is threatened, then the brain response is similar to what happens when we are in physical pain. So just a real quick diffuser for status, if somebody is in threat mode and status, is find quick wins and just publicize the heck out of it. Public acknowledgement is a great diffuser when the status threat response has been triggered. All right, now I'm going to move into one of the 2 most important areas, which is certainty. The area of certainty is where you who are listening and watching right now as leaders can have the most impact on your employees. Certainty, and look at this guy. He's chill, right? He's relaxed, he's calm. This is what we want, and this is what we want to create as much as we can. Certainty has to do with an individual's comfort level that their environment is going to stay the same. Is anybody's environment staying the same right now? Not really. Certainty has to do with our ability to accurately predict the future. And this is because our brains like patterns. Remember before I said our brains have 2 jobs, to keep us alive and to keep us safe. So our brains are hardwired to enjoy patterns, patterns of behavior, patterns of movement, patterns of work. When something new is introduced, a change occurs, that pattern is interrupted. And what happens is our brain starts focusing on the change almost at the expense of everything else until there is some kind of resolution, because we are driven to create certainty. This guy is happy, this guy is chill, because he's relatively certain that he can predict the future. This is an unhappy brain because of what is happening with COVID-19. The more often change occurs, the more severe the threat response is. Depending on the amount of control that we have over what's happening around us and change occurs, the threat response can escalate. And as I said earlier, each employee has a unique threshold for how much change that they can tolerate. The feeling of uncertainty, this is what I want to bring home to you, is the feelings of uncertainty feel to the brain like physical pain. That's why so many people in our country are just feeling exhausted. They may not be sick, but they're feeling exhausted. It's because at a subconscious level, they don't know what's going on. They can't predict the future, and they're trying to predict the future. Conversely, the more that we can predict what our future outcome is going to be, the more pleasure we're going to feel in our work. So what
Lisa, I have a
happens?
question
Yes,
on
sure.
that. Since none of us are going to be able to predict when this is really going to end or how many lives it's going to affect, and no one wants to acknowledge what the predictions are right now. I mean, we don't. We all want to create something different. So even though the science says, okay, the more we can predict what is, the better it is, the more we're going to feel comfort and pleasure and etc. I'm assuming that means that if we can't predict the future, what we can do is look towards what we can be certain about. We can be certain that today we're still here. Today our loved ones are being cared for, or we're safe in lockdown. Are you suggesting that folks then look for leaders, reach for what we can be certain about in order to refocus employees on pieces that will enact that part of their emotional well-being?
Yes. And I'm going to tell everybody, Anissa and I have not done a run through of this particular program before. So we did not have this scripted, but let's take you to the next slide.
Oh, no way. That's great.
Yeah, perfect question. Yes, the answer to your question is yes. And there are some other neuroscience principles that apply to that. And what they say is we actually have the ability to change the way that we perceive the world and perceive our situations based on our focus. So if all we are doing, I'm going to talk to everybody as just regular people, not as leaders, to help make this point. So if all we are doing is looking at the stock market, reading the plethora of conflicting information about how many people are dying and what's happening with COVID-19. Does it live in sunlight? Does it die in sunlight? Do I need to just go lay outside in my yard so that I don't get it? The social distancing, do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? If we focus on those things, that shapes the way our neuro pathways allow us to perceive the world. But if we shift our focus to different direction, what you're talking about, the things that we can be certain of, then that shifts our focus to a more positive perspective, which helps diffuse this uncertainty threat that we might have. So that's for all of us as human beings. Those are things that we need to be doing. Some people call it mindfulness. Some people call it self-compassion, self-care. That is a practice that is backed up by neuroscience. Now, for leaders, what do we need to do? The first, and I know that this may be seemingly impossible, you want to avoid as much change as you possibly can right now. There are some things that you can't avoid, but micro changes here and there in the climate of your employees' brains right now can have a tremendous impact. So as much as you can, avoid unnecessary change. Keep things as constant as possible. The second and the third and the fourth is communicate. So your responsibility as a leader is to help take your employees' attention off of the things that they cannot control and place it on the things that they can control, the things that they can be certain about. So I have another slide here with some tips for communicating. Even when you are not sure as a leader about what is going to happen in your organization, these are the things that you need to do and incorporate these into your communication plan. You want to communicate early, as early as possible. If something could be happening, let your employees know this is a possibility. We're going to do as much as we can to minimize it, but it is a possibility. So early, regularly, give your employees something to look forward to. Maybe it's Tuesdays at 9:00 a.m. There is going to be a telephonic conference. There's going to be a Zoom conference. Make it something regular so they can predict, yes, every Tuesday at this time, this is what's going to happen. When you can include times and dates, you want to include times and dates. If there's something that you know, tell your employees what you know. And if you don't know it, then tell your employees, I don't know. As soon as I know, I will tell you. You also need to tell them what you can and you can't tell them. Some of the folks that are participating right now, they're part of publicly held companies. And so there are things that you cannot share as leaders. Explain that to your employees. And then finally, let them know what support you have in place for them and what kind of availability you have for them. If you have an EAP, an employee assistance program at your company, please be talking to the folks that run that and make sure that they've got things in place to help your employees. So these are the uncertainty diffusers to help your employees be able to predict as much as they can. Gosh, I'm looking at the time. We've got so much more to cover, but any questions from you, Anissa, on this?
Now, this is incredibly helpful. Please keep going. And folks, if you're on the call with us and you have questions, please let us know. And we will make the slide deck available. And Alicia has been gracious enough to offer also a 15-minute consultation with anyone that would like to reach out and learn more about her coaching or her Neuro Leadership program. So here shortly, she'll make sure you have her information. Actually, it's on the bottom of the slide there. So Thank you, Alicia. Keep going.
You're welcome. All right, I'm going to breeze through. Okay, autonomy is control. So give your employees as much control as you possibly can, and that is going to diffuse their threat response. The more control an employee has over what they're able to do in their workplace, the greater sense of reward, the greater sense of pleasure, and the more motivated and engaged they're going to be. Okay, relatedness. This is the second most important thing that you can do to keep your employees focused and happy and motivated. Relatedness is, I belong. I'm part of a tribe. People get me. We're all in the in-group together. I'm going to skip through a lot of the details about relatedness and go right to the diffusers. There are two axes for relatedness diffusers. The first is you and your employees. So look, if you've been kind of a butthead of a leader, if you've been really dominant, if you have tried to take control away from your employees, if you are asserting yourself constantly over your employees, you are creating a gap, a you versus them with your employees. So the first thing that you need to pay attention to is building a better relationship between you and the people who report to you, making sure there is positive social connection. The second axis is employee to employee. You need to encourage relatedness between your employees, and I'm going to walk through how we do that next. So you to your employees, I'm going to tell you one of the things that you can do that can help create this sense of relatedness. And by the way, the more your employees relate to you, check this out. This is amazing neuroscience information here. The more you build relatedness with your employees, when you say something, the brain believes that it's their own thoughts. So I'm going to repeat that. This is super powerful. The more relatedness you build with your employees, when you say something, the brain will translate that as it's that employee's own thought. If relatedness doesn't exist, then the things that you're saying become a threat. So how do you build relatedness between you and your employees? Man, get a mission, a common purpose, a project. Do everything that you can to build respect. And it's not about getting your employees to respect you. It's about making sure your employees understand that you respect them. It is showing care and concern for your employees. It is connecting with them regularly. And finally, it is also listening. It's not just about what you have to say. It's making sure that you're, for lack of a better term, shutting your pie hole and you're listening to what they have to say. If we had more time, I could tell you more. Yes.
Yeah, this is brilliant. So on this, we're not talking about company mission in the future. We're talking about a mission right now, how to get through this together, for example.
That's exactly right. That's right. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say, for some companies, they have taken on a charitable product. They've taken on a charitable project, or some departments within companies have taken on a charitable project. And so that's giving everybody a common purpose, something to work for beyond just the work that they're doing, as an example. Yeah.
Well, and when the common purpose idea and project, we're helping some companies come up with a champions of change, champions of getting through this crisis together program, where they are inviting otherwise individual contributors who are, in some cases, on the floor, on the front lines, even to contribute to a greater part of what's going on with resources for people that have been laid off, or buddy systems, or coming up with communications and pieces that the normal folks in the company that are too taxed to take this on. Groups of champions of getting through this together are coming together to support the organizational mission in response to our pandemic. So that's what you're meaning, is create something that's relevant to right now, that supports employees in knowing that we're in this together, and thereby triggering that relatedness need.
Exactly. You nailed it. So this is the first axis, which is you to your employees. Here's the second axis, which is employee to employee. So it's really important that you as a leader are setting up some ground rules in communication. And I'm not talking about micromanaging things, but for an example, ground rules around bullying, that's got to stop. And you as a leader, if you've got employees who are bullying each other because one person has X amount of toilet paper, or some person was able to find masks, and other employees are like, you shouldn't have those masks, you need to give those masks to medical workers, or any of that kind of really ridiculous stuff. Those are natural responses because everybody's in threat mode, but your role as a leader is to cut that stuff off. So some ground rules in communication between employees is stop the bullying, encourage that there's positivity in communications, stop the gossiping, tell people if they have questions, they can come to you. Any of the typical backstabbing behaviors that might occur, a great ground rule is if you have an issue with somebody, you go directly to that person. We are in a crisis right now. We cannot afford to have secondary agendas and people talking behind each other's backs. We need to step up and be adults. And so here's what I'm accepting as a leader, and here's the behavior that I'm not accepting as a leader, and let's do that. So setting up ground rules. Employee to employee, figuring out how to share updates and wins, some of what you just mentioned, Anissa. Virtual happy hours are actually having a fabulous effect on relatedness, which is everybody's getting on a Zoom and they're having a drink, or they're having their coffee, virtual coffee breaks. Those kinds of things help with relatedness, particularly amongst remote employees. And believe it or not, silliness. We're seeing some great results from silliness. So it's work in your pajamas today. Let's get on a Zoom call. Let's see what's happening. So these are other ways to diffuse any kind of threat trigger that has to do with relatedness. So we covered the leader to employees, and this is about employee to employee. Real quick, the last part of the SCARF model is fairness. I'm really not going to spend much time on this. It's the perception of fair treatment. This is a tough one. I'm going to tell you, even in the best of situations, because it all has to do with perception. The best advice that I can give is, if you are doing or saying something that another employee may perceive as unfair, even though it's not, the best thing to do is to give an explanation as to why you're doing what you're doing. So that is a recap of the SCARF model. And the last question that I want to leave for everybody is based on this very hurried introduction to neuroleadership. On a scale of 1 to 5, in terms of neuroleadership effectiveness today, where would you rate yourself? Where would you say that you are as a company on a scale of 1 to 5? And Anissa, would you share any responses that we're getting?
I sure will. Let's see, Christopher says 2.5, haha. Karen, 2 to 3. Pamela says 4. Paige says 3.5. Mary says 2. Kathy says 3. Kelly says 3.
Okay.
Oh, we've got an average of 3.
Sounds like it. And honestly, that's what I would expect in a typical situation. In a COVID-19 situation, I would expect a 1 or a 2. So I'm really thrilled that the people who are participating, it sounds like they've got some good things in place already that you're doing. You may not have had the neuro leadership reasons for why you were doing them, but now you do. You have the backup for why you should do them and why you should continue to do them. You know, the last thing that I want to do is here, and I know we've got limited time, Anissa, is answer any questions that you have, any questions that our audience has. And as you mentioned, here is my contact information. I'm committed to helping you help your employees get through this situation. You can reach out to me in either of these methods. And as Anissa said, I will give you a 15-minute consultation to help you neuro leadership your communication processes.
Well, thank you, Alicia. This has been really eye-opening and fantastic. And I want to make a quick mention about the 15-minute strategy session. 15 minutes may not seem a lot, but when you're an expert like Alicia, 15 minutes can really make a difference. I know I've been on 15-minute laser focus sessions, and it is can be so much more valuable than you ever thought 15 minutes could be. So thank you very much for your generosity in that way. And I know that we are coming up, we have our next program in about 15 minutes, you guys. It's with professional consultant Wendy Carrick, and the topic is be the leader your people need, using situational leadership too. So thank you guys so much for joining our summit today. Leading in a Crisis, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have 40+ speakers over the course of April. Alicia, would you change the next slide? I also want you guys to know that we have put together both an outplacement coaching package as well as a retained leader package for coaching. If you were on the call yesterday, you know that outplacement, unfortunately, is something that is happening right now, and is also something that's going to potentially expose organizations that survive our chaos to a massive amount of potential litigation, as well as loss of productivity, et cetera. So we put our heads together and we came up with something that we think that you'll like. It's name your own price. We know what the value of an outplacement coaching is, but we've reached out to our expert outplacement coaches, and Wendy Carrick, in fact, is rallying the troops, and we've put together a high touch meets high tech hybrid digital and personal coaching package specifically for our clients and friends that are joining us on the summit. My email, you can see at the bottom of the screen. You can reach me and my team at leader@turnkeycoachingsolutions.com for more information. And then one more piece, we also have a buy one, get one training, as I mentioned earlier. So don't hesitate to reach out about that if we may be of service. Join us for more talks. And if we didn't get to your Q&A today, I Oh gosh, Beverly's question is right. I have to say this real quick. Alicia, tell us, if
Yes.
we can't say, can I give you some feedback? What are we supposed to say?
Ask your employee to evaluate their own performance in the situation. So if there was a meeting, let's say there was a sales meeting and the sales meeting went horribly wrong, or even not horribly wrong, maybe there were just a couple of areas for improvement. Say to your employee, tell me what your thoughts are about that meeting. Leave it open-ended, let the employee answer, ask some leading questions. How did you feel about this interaction? Did you think that there may have been an opportunity to say something different? Really, what would you have said different? Do you think there was an opportunity maybe to do something different? Well, what would you have done that was different? So instead of saying, hey, we need to sit down and we really need to talk about what happened in that sales meeting. You know, I gave you this training and you missed this and you missed that and you missed that. That is full blown. I've got a gun to your head. Let me give you some feedback. Instead, let the employee guide the employee to give you their feedback about what they saw and observed, and then respond to that.
Beautiful. So in a nutshell, a coach approach to leadership is more effective using open-ended questions.
Always.
Brilliant. Alicia, this has been absolutely fantastic. I know we're going to have you back. I know that there's so much left undone here, and there's very few models right now that could probably be more impactful for our teams. So, Alicia, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Anissa.
Thank you.
Everybody take care.